All right, let's get started. So we're going to start with just a little introduction from folks from Manchester and Essex. I'm Dylan Sussman. I'm the plan facilitator who was hired by the state to work on this plan for Manchester and Essex. And I have with me tonight Peter Flinker.
Hello.
Peter is the principal of Dodson and Flinker and my boss, and Aishwarya Kulkarni,
Hi. Hello, everyone.
who's also worked on this project. So folks from Manchester and Essex, start us off, please.
Hi. I'm Sue Brown, and I'm the Manchester Town Planner, and I just want to say it's been a great experience working with Essex on this project. While our two towns are different in a number of ways, this project has really highlighted the many commonalities that we share, including a desire to see our downtowns thrive, and also for them to be a reflection of and serve our greater communities and to make our local economy stronger and more resilient. So it's been a pleasure meeting some of the folks and working with some of the folks in Essex on this. And I want to thank those who are joining us tonight. I know there's a lot going on. I also, Dylan, do you mind if I just thank the Manchester Steering Committee members, Christine Delicio, Erica Brown, Becky Jakes, Sonia Nathan, Amy Lage, Linda Crosby, and Gar Moore. Some of them are not able to be here tonight, but I just wanted to put it out there. I'm hopeful that you'll go over the purpose of tonight's meeting and I can just cut this short and leave it at that.
I will, yep.
Sounds great, thank you.
And I'm Dana Menon, the new town planner for Essex, and I just wanted to echo some of Sue's thoughts as well. This has been so far a really great process working between the two towns, and we've had some really great participants involved. Thanks to everybody from Essex who has also been involved, Jody Harris and Donna Roy and Ruth Perrine, and of course Brendan Ricky, the town administrator, has been really involved. He couldn't make it tonight, unfortunately. He had a meeting conflict. And then all the other constituents who have also been part of this process. The Greater Cape Ann Chamber has been fabulous as well. And we're looking forward to the next steps. And I would really encourage everybody who has been a great voice through this whole process to continue to be involved in this tonight and going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Dana and Sue. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, sorry about that. I'd like to be able to see the rest of you when I'm sharing my screen, but Zoom doesn't want me to, unfortunately. Okay, so here we are. It's not August 29th, it's September 29th, 2021. Aishwarya, can you let people in as they come in, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Great. So the agenda tonight is we have 5 minutes for the welcome, which we've done. We're going to have a presentation, which is pretty big because it goes through the whole project, including recommendations and case studies. So we're hoping that it's engaging for you. If you start to find yourself glazing over, feel free to interrupt and ask us questions. So we're going to review, in the presentation, we're going to review the background of the project and the process, some key findings, which for those of you who came to the first meeting will be familiar. And then we're going to spend the bulk of the time talking about the recommendations that are coming out of the project. Then we'll have about 45 minutes or more to talk about these project recommendations, answer questions, and talk about prioritizing those recommendations. And then we're going to have a poll using Zoom, a simple question that basically asks you, which project recommendations do you support and which ones do you think are best? Which one do you think is best? And then we'll wrap up. So this is for the Rapid Recovery Program, which is an effort by the Commonwealth to ensure that all the communities in the state have data-driven plans to aid in their COVID recovery efforts. and to develop what they're calling shovel-ready ideas for future grant applications. And then at the same time to support the Commonwealth in collecting data about the impacts of COVID and what's happening in communities, and also what kinds of projects that communities think are important to recover from COVID, so that the state can prioritize funding in various programs. So as I said earlier, the objectives for tonight are to share our results and to get your feedback. The project started around mid-March. There was a business survey that went out, and about 18 businesses in Essex responded, and about 11 in Manchester responded, and they were about the impacts of COVID. We collected some background information, submitted that to the state in late May, had a community forum also in late May. Then there was this whole process going on with what were called SMEs, or subject matter experts, who were providing information about the best ways to go about doing downtown economic development planning. We worked up some project recommendations, reviewed those and prioritized them with sort of an ad hoc steering committee we had, which was composed of people both from Essex and Manchester. Had some great conversations about project recommendations, fleshed them out more, and then there was a process where 6 of the 9 project recommendations were reviewed by these subject matter experts, and we had basically a consultation with the project committee and the experts for each of these project ideas, and the experts suggested ways to improve them. Meanwhile, we've been working on the final plan, which is due on Friday, October 8th. So we're racing to the finish, and here we are at our second community forum. The project area for Manchester is the downtown. I think the downtown of Manchester is pretty recognizable as the area around the harbor, running basically from along Central Street, from Pine Street, down Union Street, down Beach and Summer, as well as the harbor and Musconomo Park and Reed Park. In Essex, for this project, the downtown is defined to include the Causeway, Martin Street, heading up Main Street here, and then heading up a little bit towards JT Farnham's. So heading up Eastern Ave to Farnham's and the shopping center there, and up to Hobbs Court on Main Street. Okay, so we're gonna, like I said, I'm gonna review some key findings. I apologize for the bullets, and I'm gonna try to get through these quickly, since I think many of you have seen them before. So not surprising, the customer base for both downtowns are relatively wealthy. Median income in Essex is 113,000 and 125,000 in Manchester. Both of the communities have a significant population that's not working in the town. Your residents have a long commute, which is telling us, A, a lot of them don't work there, and B, during normal times when people are going to offices, they may not have a lot of time to spend in the downtowns. It also means that a lot of residents aren't around during the day to patronize local businesses. The employment opportunities in the towns are limited, and sometimes they don't pay enough to afford housing. So a number of past plans have talked about the need for housing in the downtowns. And employers, I think, have had some struggles in the past to attract employees, and that's made much more difficult in the aftermath of COVID. The local customer base is probably not sufficient to support the downtowns you have. In talking to business owners, they talk a lot about how visitors are really important for their success, and that in particular the summer months are when a lot of businesses make their money. So both downtowns rely on regional visitors and visitors from beyond. Aishwarya, could you mute people, please? Thank you. Okay, so this is a map showing the sort of 5, 10, and 20-minute drive times from the two downtowns. I think it's it's worth seeing that a 10-minute drive from Manchester gets you to Essex and vice versa, right? So it's very convenient for somebody who lives near downtown Essex to drive to downtown Manchester and vice versa. At 20 minutes, the customer areas are basically the same, with Essex picking up a bit more to the northwest. So in terms of kind of small regional customers, you have the same market. And then obviously you have different markets for those who can walk to your downtowns. The next category in the diagnostic is the physical environment. So I went through the customer base. Now we're going through the physical environment. So both downtowns have a really strong sense of place. That's a key selling point. And that's important because that sense of place is increasingly important in the face of competition from online sales and sort of the growth of fast casual dining, where you can get a reasonable meal out by a highway somewhere. So for downtown economic development, it's that sense of place, the experience, the uniqueness that is going to draw a lot of customers. Both downtowns have limited parking. Both downtowns would benefit from streetscape improvements. So the streetscapes in both places are functional. In Manchester, along Beach Street and Summer Street, they're pretty good. The streetscape's pretty good. But in both places, there are opportunities for sidewalk improvements, pedestrian lighting, wayfinding, street furniture, public art, pocket parks, etc. However, both towns are historic and they have limited right-of-way. So there's limited room for those streetscape improvements. So whatever goes into the streetscape has to be, just right. And there's going to have to be some thinking to decide what that just right thing is. The historic buildings in both downtowns are key to their sense of place, as are the natural settings. So the harbor in Manchester and the Great Marsh in Essex, really compelling, especially to someone like me who's from out of town. And so there's a big opportunity to build on what makes each of these downtowns unique. In terms of the business environment, so that's the mix of business, whether there are nodes in the downtown, which your downtowns basically are too small to have nodes. Essex has limited local serving goods and services, things that residents use on a daily or weekly basis, like a pharmacy or a grocery store. And that was brought up a lot in meetings. There are some clusters of businesses, restaurants, and then the sort of antique home goods and crafts cluster. So looking at the kinds of businesses that are existing is a way to get a sense of what kind of future businesses might be attracted. And so you can either build on those clusters or kind of complement the clusters. In Manchester by the Sea, you've got a more complete downtown with the pharmacy and the grocery store and hairdresser and so on. The clusters there are professional services, a lot of real estate agents, restaurants, and then an interesting couple of businesses that sort of specialize in low price but relatively high-end goods. So consignment shops, or there's an off-price merchandise shop. The COVID impacts of businesses in both communities are pretty significant, at the same time as they show that the downtowns have some resilience to them. So there was one permanent business closure in Essex. There's 6 storefronts currently vacant. This information is as of May, so it may not be currently what it is, but that's what it was when we did the inventory in May. Information from the survey showed that 67% of the businesses who responded generated less revenue in 2020 than they did in 2019, and 50% of the businesses said they had a revenue decline of 25% or more. And some of those revenue declines were quite significant. In Manchester by the Sea, there was one permanent business closure, one business relocated to Essex, and 2 storefronts were vacant in May. 81% of the businesses who responded said they generated less revenue, and 45% of businesses saw revenue decline by 25% or more. There were other COVID impacts on, like difficulties getting employees or retaining employees, closures, increased operating expenses, and so on. So the COVID impacts are severe. And I think it's fair to say that for many businesses, it's going to take years to recover from them. Then administrative capacity, the key findings, you have engaged town staff and volunteers. They showed up to the meetings we held for this and really participated and had a lot of great things to say. Very smart. Very much appreciate the people who participated in this process. There appear to be effective organizations. The two communities have complementary skills. So I think that's something to build on and continue the collaboration. At the same time, there isn't extra staff capacity or volunteer capacity, I would say, in either community. I get the sense that people are already working to their max, and so responding to COVID and continuing downtown economic development is going to be a challenge. The other key aspect of the administrative capacity is the regulatory environment. So in Manchester, we heard that that's not really a major barrier. In fact, a number of businesses we spoke to talked about how welcoming Manchester was to new businesses. In Essex, regulatory environment, zoning, various business permitting is seen as a barrier to success. The mixed use zoning recently passed for the downtown area in Essex, and additional zoning changes are underway. Okay, so that's the key findings. Now I'm going to talk about project categories. So the Rapid Recovery Program has 6 categories of projects: the public realm, the private realm, revenue and sales, administrative capacity, tenant mix, and cultural and arts. Our project recommendations fall under the public realm, revenue and sales, admin capacity, and tenant mix, and basically incorporate cultural and arts into many of those. So culture and arts were seen as very important to both communities and important to promote and cultivate. But we didn't have any recommendations that were specifically and solely about culture and arts. So I'm going to walk through these categories one at a time in terms of the groups of project recommendations. So the first one is the public realm. And I would say we probably have the most project recommendations in this category. And I think it was highly valued by the committee members who participated. Seemed like there are some important things here. Okay, so the first project recommendation is wayfinding. All of the recommendations, except for one, which I'll note later, are for both downtowns. So the two towns applied for this grant collaboratively. And so the instructions from the state program were that the recommendations that come out should apply to both communities, with the idea that the communities would have stronger applications for many future grants if they applied together. It doesn't mean that the communities have to apply for future funding together or they have to work together in the future. It's just that we tried to, identify things where they could as much as possible. So the wayfinding project is creating a wayfinding system for both downtowns that reinforce the unique sense of place for each of the downtowns. Use elements other than signs as much as possible, and consider approaching the project as a regional tourism initiative. The budget for that is somewhere between $50,000 for just design to over $200,000 for design and installation. There are a number of communities in Massachusetts who have done this cheaper than that for the, maybe in the $80,000 to $120,000 range. The subject matter expert who provided the consultation on this thought that this is not a project to try to save money on. They thought that a really comprehensive wayfinding system that's really well designed and implemented will have a lot more benefit than something that's less robust. The time frame is less than 5 years. I'm not going to walk through all the partners and all the funding sources for each of these slides. I think it's enough to just show that there is funding, and I'll call out a few key partners and funding sources. On all of these, I haven't specified kind of all the players who've been involved in the project. I just say town and key groups. So that includes, the town staff, the Essex Merchant Group, the Essex Economic Development Committee, the Manchester Downtown Improvement Committee, historic commissions and societies, and obviously very important, the businesses themselves and also the downtown residents. So for this project, key partners are Historic District Commission, MassDOT, especially in Essex where signs would be located on a state highway. That's under MassDOT jurisdiction, and local artists. So some of the risks here are difficulties reaching consensus on the design, obtaining funding, signage clutter, and MassDOT approval. And KPI is performance indicators. I think I'm going to skip those for tonight in the interest of time. So just some initial observations. With each of these projects, we're not able to design the project. We can't design a wayfinding system for you within the budget we have. The goal is just to kind of tee up the project for future implementation. But some observations, it seems like it would make sense to mark the gateways of Essex. And when I say that, I don't mean a literal gateway. I mean just communicating that you've reached the downtown through some means, whether that's changes in the streetscape, could be signage, it could be banners, it could be something. Just something so that people know they've arrived in the downtown when they're on car, and when they're on foot, they know when they've reached the end of the downtown and it's time to turn around. It's probably important to provide really good signage for any public parking in the area. So there's public parking in the area behind the town hall here, and then very limited public parking by the boat launch over here. And then some key decision points. So when you come out of the public parking, when you reach the intersection of Martin and Main Street, when you're walking down the causeway, how do you know to keep going? When you're heading down the causeway, how do you know that there are more businesses further on if you've never been to Essex before? And likewise, further on down Main Street here, and at the intersection of Southern, Eastern, and Main Street. In Manchester by the Sea, similar, it's important to really clearly indicate where the parking is. Like Essex, there's parking hidden behind Town Hall, and the parking over here, which is semi-public, and it's unclear whether it's public or not. And also up in the northern part of the study area, there's also parking that's unclear whether it's public or not. So making that clear through signage and making clear how to get to the parking where it is, and then what you do when you leave the parking, where the downtown is, encouraging people to keep going when they reach points where there might be gaps in businesses, as there is along Bridge Street, and so on. So just a simple example of a case study. So this is wayfinding for Scituate. So you can see they have a kiosk design, and then some parking signs and directional signs for key destinations like library, senior center, town hall. So there's a consistency of colors. There's a logo that was developed for the wayfinding efforts that can carry through into other town efforts, and consistent colors and design. But as I said before, wayfinding is not necessarily just about signs. There are other ways to communicate to people that they're in a downtown and how to get around. Second recommendation is outdoor lighting. So lighting along streets and in public spaces. Budget here is $50,000 to $200,000, a medium budget, short-term project, take a couple of years to implement. Key partners, all those main ones I said before, plus again the Historic District Commission, historic societies, MassDOT, local artists, some funding sources. With this one, there are sort of different ways you could approach the project, and so there's a sort of planning and launching phase that maybe you could get a Commonwealth Places seed grant for. If you want to do a full lighting plan, including installation, maybe you're looking for a Commonwealth Places grant combined possibly with Mass Downtowns Initiative technical assistance. MassWorks has paid for street lighting before. Often that requires some sort of, to be competitive, often those grants require some sort of private development that is depending on public improvements. Shared streets and space grants, and so on. So a key aspect of this project is focusing on pedestrian lighting, using the lighting as a branding and wayfinding element. So light poles themselves signal that you're in a downtown, right? So they're one way of serving that gateway function. When the light poles change, you know you're in downtown. They can also have hanging baskets, planters on them. They can have banners on them. So outdoor lighting, I think, was seen as a pretty key element for implementation. And then another part of lighting is promoting dark sky principles. So excess lighting can have negative impacts on human health. It makes it difficult to sleep. It can impact wildlife, and then too much lighting can spill over into residential areas and have an impact there. So having dark sky principles be incorporated into the town's outdoor lighting, but then also promoted town-wide, I think makes sense for this project. So in Essex, it seems like basically the entire western portion of the study area would benefit from pedestrian lighting, particularly probably along the Causeway and Martin Street, if I had to prioritize. In Manchester, Beach Street and Summer Street already have outdoor lighting that's pedestrian lighting that's pretty good, although I've heard it has some maintenance issues. And then Union Street, Bridge Street, Central Street, Elm Street, and School Street would benefit from improved pedestrian lighting. So a case study here, Topsfield recently installed pedestrian lighting in their historic downtown. What's interesting about these fixtures is that they're actually solar fixtures. So you can't see it, which is the point, but the pole itself is actually a solar panel, and it has a special black solar panels on it that make it look historic. And so one advantage of that is it might cut down on the need for electrical installation and make the project more affordable, as well as more sustainable from a climate change and energy use perspective. Okay, moving on to public bathrooms. So we have two more in this public realm category. So this is a medium cost project. Again, short term. Key partners are visitors and the senior center, some funding sources, AARP, Livable Communities Grant might go partway towards implementing this. It's possible you could use ARPA funding for this. You'll see in a lot of these that there's a TBC, to be confirmed, on the ARPA funding. The ARPA funding is pretty complicated to figure out what is covered and what's not covered, or what's allowed and not allowed. And so there's a certain amount of risk that the town, I guess, would be taking to use ARPA funding for some of these projects. And then EDA competitive tourist grants, and also sponsorship and advertising. All right, so simple project, right? Make some bathrooms, promote them, and then most importantly, maintain them. Case study, this is a public toilet at Volunteer Park in Shelter Island. This is the park, and the toilet looks like this. This one's actually from Portland, but it looks like this in Shelter Island. So it's $122,000 installed, and it has a 1,000-gallon tank. All right. The final one in this category is a placemaking plan. So those first three were projects where you would hire a consultant to do some sort of design process usually, and then implement the project. This is stepping back and taking a broad look at the downtowns and making plans that are more holistic. So looking at sidewalk conditions, looking at street furnishings, looking at park improvements, looking at lighting and wayfinding, public restrooms, all together, and trying to coordinate those projects so that they have similar material, similar look and feel, so that you can be sure that you're making the most use of your limited public space. It's a medium project, medium cost project, again, short term. Some key partners are local design professionals and bike ped groups, as well as businesses, town committees, etc. Some funding sources for this are the Mass Downtowns Initiative, which sort of was running this project for the state. Your regional planning agency, MAPC, might be able to help with what's called district local technical assistance. You might get a community planning grant from EOEA. You might be able to take advantage of the Essex Heritage Partnership Grant Program, which is a one-to-one matching program. So this project is stepping back a level. The opportunity with it is you have better coordinated implementation across a range of elements. The risk with it is the opportunity cost. So you put resources into planning instead of implementation in the short term. Some opportunities, the town hall area in Essex has some space to do things, so that including the park behind. The park at Park by the Village Restaurant has a little bit of space that could be used for a kiosk or something similar to that, or by Essex Shipbuilding Museum and the public boat launch. There's some space to host winter events or do some wayfinding installations or put in more seating. The Pocket Park near the bridge, similar opportunities for public art, or a gazebo, or whatever it is you might want in your public space. And then again, you have public seating and some plantings along the causeway, including the Essex Scenic Byway sign, which is like a 3-sided kiosk. In Manchester by the Sea, the town common seems like it has opportunities. I know it was recently redone. It's quite beautiful. The property at the corner of Elm and Central has a little bit more space between the front of the building and the sidewalk, so there's an opportunity for, benches or planters. Space in front of the library is an opportunity zone. The corner of Beach Street and Summer Street has a fenced-in area with the Richdale sign in it and some beautiful old trees. Great spot for a pocket park, right on a prime commercial street. Obviously, It's only possible if the property owner is interested. And then the two parks, Reed Park and Masconomo Park, seem like, again, opportunities for winter events and so on. Peter is going to talk about this case study and the next one.
Am I? Hello, everybody. Hello again. Yeah, I mean, this kind of comprehensive look at downtown placemaking is done by a lot of communities. And I mean, you can see by, I think, your own experience, if you deal with just one of these things by itself, often you don't get that much bang for your buck. So really the comprehensive plan is designed to look at it and figure out, how can we integrate these different things to really make an experience for visitors that's sort of more than just one thing, because that's the key to making people stay in the downtown longer and also to making them come back. So this study in Turner's Falls was really designed to look at what, previous to this was a pretty straight, pretty simple and kind of boring downtown, even though it had nice sidewalks and planters, there wasn't much to do. So we looked at all the different things that we could think of might fit in. And they're sort of illustrated here, from streetscape enhancements to pocket parks and so on. And then one of the things we did is then showed people case studies, showed people, in this case, some visuals of what these different places could be like, and then asked them what they thought the priorities were. And if you go to the next one, Dylan, this has actually been implemented. This was done 10 years ago. The plan was done 9 years ago, maybe. And they've since then, I think as the basis of this, they installed a new plaza. This sort of creates a gathering place in this long, narrow sort of Main Street strip. It's sort of a place where suddenly you stop and you say, oh, I've arrived someplace. And then they've continued to look at additional streetscape improvements, which they're looking at sort of incrementally by this sort of tactical approach of marking off the pavement to test out different ideas for changing street corners and so on. What's the next one? In Oak Bluffs, they've did a really beautiful downtown streetscape plan a couple of years ago with a lot of sort of developed plans for each area within the downtown, a lot of visualization to help people understand what the options were, and then started to think about implementing it, and then COVID. But of course, like you, they've been looking at, since COVID started, temporary installations to bring people outside. And because they had a streetscape plan in place, they already knew a lot of the things that they could possibly test in addition to outdoor dining in terms of circulation, where you might cut off parking and so on. So this was really a good opportunity to test out some of those things. And the next one, I think, shows some of their wayfinding, which was developed as part of the streetscape plan. And on the left is the sort of draft sort of studies, and on the right is what they actually installed, which was almost exactly what the consultants had planned as part of the initial project.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, and so this Oak Bluffs project is a really interesting one because it's had a lot of implementation to it. So the town appropriated funding recently for streetscape improvements. They also got $1 million grant from the state for one portion of the project to implement that from the Seaport Economic, I can't remember what it's called, SEE, Seaport Economic Collaborative or Consultant or Consortium or something like that. Okay, so putting those different ideas together, we did a couple sketches very quick to just show how the elements can fit together. So this is existing conditions entering downtown Manchester, and then showing if you add the decorative street lighting, pedestrian lighting to the streets, if you add banners to some of the existing Cobra head fixtures, add hanging baskets to the planters, you start to get a sense of a little bit of that you're entering a downtown, that you've arrived. Looking at improvements near the Manchester Town Hall. So this is the existing conditions. And then similar improvements there. So replacing the chain link fence with something more attractive and substantial. Installing some planters, putting in a curb bump out at the crosswalk, changing the crosswalk material so that they're consistent with the materials of crosswalks on Beach Street, adding the decorative lighting, adding improved parking wayfinding. There's a sign here currently, but it's a little bit hidden. And the two signs on either side of the street are not consistent. So those are some views of improvements in Manchester.
If go back to the previous one there, Dylan.
This one?
No, the existing conditions on the next slide.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, I think one of the key functions of this kind of streetscape improvement, as a lot of you know, is you sort of take something which is, it's kind of, for a visitor, it's kind of uncertain, you know, what's public and what's private? Where do I belong? Where am I welcome as a visitor? I assume I could walk on the sidewalk, but I'm so close to this person's house, you know, am I supposed to be here? And if you go to the next one, what all these streetscape improvements do collectively, you know, the benches that are clearly public, the continuous lighting, the plantings, and so on. All of this signals to the visitor that this is literally the public realm. It's a place where you are welcome. We want you to be here. It's very clear where you should walk and where you shouldn't walk. And you can, you know, through the design of this, you can also lead people away from places, maybe the private places where you don't want them to go, and lead them toward places where you do want them to go, like your local shops and restaurants. So again, it's like any one of these things helps functionally, but together they create the system that's sort of, you know, taking your visitors by the hand and welcoming them to the downtown.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, so similar improvements in Essex. So existing conditions along the causeway at Woodman's and CK Pearl. Adding decorative lighting, adding a couple more benches in front of the buildings at Woodman's and some more planters there, doing a tree planting and some other plants in the front of the parking lot for CK Pearl, improving the crosswalk, maybe with some sort of funky colored design, expanding the outdoor seating for CK Pearl, and planting a small tree and some plants on the edge of their current parking lot. So those are some, and adding a banner for Essex. So those are some ideas for.
And, you know, a subtle point here is one of the key things about this, the outdoor dining design, is to make it something that sort of contributes to the life along the street, right? I mean, we've all been to places where the outdoor dining is kind of hidden behind fences or planters, and it's sort of clearly they're trying to separate it from the street. But what I think is the funnest place to visit, the interesting places where you want to walk around or where you can see what's going on. You know, the cafes are separated from the public sidewalk, but you can look into them and sort of enjoy what's going on, even if you're not spending money there. And again, it's all part of, you know, bringing people back to a place again and again, making it a place where you want to go down of an evening and just hang out, and then maybe you'll spend some money.
Okay, this is entering the causeway from Martin Street area. So, oops. And then some improvements. So adding some plantings in the front of the Rodin Antiques building, putting in a bench in their front lawn if they're willing. So these are private realm improvements, right? So obviously they require cooperation or enthusiasm from a property owner. Adding a tree and changing their sign from a sort of highway style sign to a more pedestrian oriented blade sign. So some subtle improvements, but trying to take advantage of every little shred of space that's available in a pretty constrained street environment.
Yeah, it also illustrates, you know, in both communities, you really can't separate the public and the private. I mean, you want to separate them functionally, but visually it's all part of one sort of what could be and is a wonderful container, again, for visitors. So it's sort of like one of our conclusions that it's key to work together across that boundary with this idea of placemaking and that has to do with the lighting, the planting, and everything else.
Yeah, and I guess I should I should note that in both of the Essex example, the power lines went away. That's a very expensive project, and it may not be feasible in Essex given the floodplain issues. But burying power lines is an extremely effective way to improve a downtown. And you can see that in Manchester where there aren't power lines. So it's not a project recommendations, but I guess put it in the hat for if some person wants to donate a lot of money to the town sometime. Revenue and sales. So project recommendations. So we have 9 recommendations so far. Total, we've gone through 4 of them so far. Revenue and sales category. Doing branding and marketing for the 2 towns. So this would be sort of a shared effort where you might have one consultant and sort of similar implementation infrastructure, but obviously the brands for the 2 communities would be distinct, reflecting the uniqueness of each community. It's a low budget project, can be a short-term project. Partners, traditional media, social media influencers. You might be able to get funding from Mass Downtowns Initiative or Mass Office of Travel and Tourism grant. So some examples. These are examples of social media from Martha's Vineyard. So they're actually the social media accounts for various businesses, but they're doing a really great job of promoting Martha's Vineyard and its sense of place, right? They're using great photos. They're using sort of cultural touch points, and the social media accounts for these businesses become key to the sort of visitors' understanding of Martha's Vineyard. So I was on Martha's Vineyard this summer and looking for information about a bike path and looking for a place where I could eat near the bike path. And actually this Point B real estate agent's website kept coming up in searches over and over again. And I actually visited this number 4 on their list, No Man's Restaurant. So this realtor basically has become a one-person shop for tourism promotion on Martha's Vineyard. And so the idea here is to coordinate the social media accounts for the various businesses, not telling them exactly what they need to say, but making sure that they're hitting on similar themes and reinforcing the overall brand for the downtowns. Peter?
So, yeah, I mean, wayfinding itself obviously is a branding exercise, sort of, or the best wayfinding is where you sort of work with that sense of place while you're giving people a sense of direction and celebrating the local resources. So this example from Wakefield is interesting, where they sort of built everything off of the historic image of the old bandstand, and that became part of the signage, but also the colors were picked up, pulled into the different materials, the physical materials, and also the written materials. And they developed a style guide that adopted all of these as sort of the standard messaging template for everything in town. So it's really sort of integrated across the board. The next example, I think, shows another one by Favorman Design in Wells, Maine, where a pretty simple idea. Let's pick up, just this image of the buoys and, adopt a few simple colors based on, the sea and the color of the buoys and the boats, and run that through everything. So it's, again, part of the signage. It's on the bus stops, it's on the beach passes, and it can even be integrated in the street furnishings, like the bike racks. So, a really interesting and clever way to pull everything together and sort of, even with a place that has a strong sense of place already, you're sort of highlighting that, providing a little seasoning to bring it out, to use a cooking metaphor, I guess.
Okay, the next project is off-season events and placemaking. So we heard that events have been effective in both downtowns for drawing customers, and they're also something that the residents want more of. That's what we heard. They're an opportunity for people to get out and see each other and have a sense of community and have something to do. So this is a low budget project, short-term project. Key partners, community organizations, schools, arts organizations, local makers, the people who can do stuff, can make stuff, and a placemaking consultant. Some funding sources that are unique to this, crowdfunding through Patronicity, NEFA Arts Grants, Art Place America, National Association of Realtors placemaking grants. The action here is to develop a winter festival. So this is a proposed idea, to develop a winter festival that takes place after the holidays over multiple weekends. So sort of in the dead zone in January through March, when winter is at its most bleak and we all hunker in our houses. So try to get people out at that time. And the way to do that is to create warming spaces with activities. So for example, you could do that at Reed Park or at the restaurant for the parking lot for the village restaurant. And then encourage people to stroll around the downtown, get the involvement of all the businesses so that they're creating welcoming activities in their businesses, and then provide a trolley between the two downtowns and potentially area sledding hills if the weather permits, and other attractions. So the goal here is to make it a big event where you're bringing people between the two downtowns and to other area attractions, and basically setting up the event so that it can take place and be repeated over a couple of different weekends. And then the materials that go into this can be used in subsequent years. So, Peter, you want to explain these examples?
Well, there's a very interesting one in Fall River called Winter Bridge that they've been doing for a couple of years. And basically they took an empty lot on the edge of the downtown and converted it with pretty simple materials, using local, students from the high school and local artists. But what's really important is there are activities there every weekend for 6 weeks in the wintertime. And, obviously starting with fire pits that you can warm yourself, but also it's a combination of just a place where you can go and hang out and make things to do yourself. But then they also have activities that are programmed throughout it. So it's sort of a combination of festival programming with just placemaking. And then similar in Edmonton, outdoor dining activities, just very simple with tables and chairs and wood burning fireplaces, and then places to sit. So again, signaling to everyone that you are welcome here, come and have fun. This is a public space. What's the next one? Oh, and in faraway Wayzata, Minnesota, they have a beautiful lakefront park in the summer. And so they created this winter activation scheme to bring people there in the winter. They have holiday lights, of course, but it's really organized to light up this whole downtown and bring people there and make it comfortable to walk around at night. So it's not just for decoration, it's for functionality. And then within those spaces, they have lots of different things for people to do, from an ice wall where you can carve your own graffiti on there. There's an activity box where you can find toys to play with your dog and games to play and all things. And then a big public curling court, which has materials and instructions that if you've never curled, I guess you can learn how to play. So again, working with sort of the local themes and activities to activate the space.
Okay, tenant mix. So in this category, we have cultivating desirable businesses. It's a medium cost project, short term, maybe 3 years for the initial efforts. And the idea here is to to try to attract the types of businesses that people want in the downtown. So as I said earlier, we heard that in Essex in particular, there's a strong desire for local goods and services. There's also a need for job creating businesses, high quality jobs that will enable people to live in these communities without a long commute. So steps to do that are creating a market study. That's for Manchester by the Sea. Essex already has one. Conducting an environmental scan. So going out and talking to existing business owners, finding out what's working, what's not working, what kind of businesses they think could be successful. Looking at the available spaces, thinking about what kind of businesses could be successful in the available storefronts. Exploring and creating programs. That could be things like a mentoring program for new entrepreneurs, a buy local campaign. There have been some really successful buy local campaigns that, as a result of COVID, you actually had one in Manchester, where there was basically like a shopping spree that was given away. Pop-up space for new businesses, and then creating marketing materials and doing outreach to potential businesses. Some funding, again, you might be able to get some funding from MAPC, District Local Technical Assistance, or from the Community Capacity Building grant from MDI, or a grant from the Community Compact. And this is an example of just one of those sort of program ideas, the idea of creating a pop-up incubator space. And during one of the conversations with the committee for this project, this idea, I think, seemed really appealing of buying some prefab sheds and setting them up in a public space and making those available for local artisans or other new business people to try out their business and see if it works before graduating to a permanent brick and mortar space. So this is an example of that from Ashland. It's the Corner Spot pop-up incubator, where they have a combination of sort of a park gathering space and then also this shed that is a host to new businesses.
Apparently, they've had more than 50 different vendors come into the shed. And I think the reason they're coming is that they're also doing programming in the park. So they're bringing people there to create customers for the potential businesses, and one feeds off the other. It's a very interesting combination.
Yeah, and this also can be even more temporary than this. It can be a temporary artisans fair or a temporary business fair, like a farmer's market, or like I believe in Essex, there was an artisan fair a couple of years ago in the Woodman's parking lot. So continuing that kind of effort. And then finally, the last category we have is admin capacity. So as I said earlier, there are people in both communities who are involved in economic development, both volunteers and organizations and town staff are already doing a lot. And so it seems like it would be helpful to have somebody who's focused just on this. So the proposal here is to hire a short-term economic development project manager, and that could potentially be funded by a grant from the Community Compact, possibly ARPA funding, with 6 months to figure out what the position is and hire somebody in 2 years to test them out. And I think what really excites me about this project idea is that the idea is that the person would be there to basically get the tools in place, to provide technical assistance and training to volunteers, and basically equip the volunteers in the two towns to carry on with economic development activities after the grant ends. So this has been tried previously, and we'll show you an example of it. But the failing of the previous attempt at this was that they didn't do the technical assistance and the training for volunteers. So when the grant ended, the effort ended. So I think this idea of creating the tools, creating the systems, creating the outreach materials and so on, and providing the technical assistance is a really good one. So the case study here is the Gateway Hilltown's Economic Development Director. It was funded for 12 months with $100,000 from a community compact grant position. So it was 6 towns. They hired somebody to get things rolling. They promoted branding, promoted training, promoted training, and got some great things done. Unfortunately, when the money ran out, the towns didn't have funding to continue paying the staff person. Nonetheless, they did attract some new businesses to part of the state that, I don't know if you can see this picture up here, but it's very, very rural. These are some very small towns that are pretty far away from anything. So getting economic development in those areas is a big win, and getting new businesses is a big win.
Actually, Dylan, it started in 2017 and continued through last year. So they actually carried it on for a couple more years.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure how they funded the additional years, but I guess it was successful enough that they did.
Thanks. Okay, and then the last recommendation is zoning changes for Essex. This is a project that's already underway, but seems really important for downtown Essex because rezoning changes. So Essex adopted a downtown district, but it is now looking at zoning for the rest of the town. And so the zoning for the rest of the town is going to have impacts on the downtown. And so it's a medium cost project, sort of short term, 1 or 2 years. Steps here are to conduct a diagnostic of existing zoning, to identify the basic desired land use patterns. So where business is desirable, where are the nodes, where are they not desirable? How are you going to deal with the existing businesses if they happen to be in undesirable places? How to deal with land use conflicts and performance standards. So things like outdoor lighting and dark skies and parking lot design and building and site design. How sites will interact with the public realm to make places more pedestrian friendly. Then drafting the zoning and map changes and adopting the zoning. And we don't have a case study for that one. There just are so many examples of zoning changes in Massachusetts, we couldn't pick one. So that's the presentation. And now it's time for some conversation. Anybody still there? Great, we still have some people here. So.
And more people coming in.
Somebody just joined us. Donna. All right, so the first set of questions, I guess I'll share my screen again. First set of questions is related to, on the current slide, is related to these projects. So, I'm wondering if you all have any questions about these. Let's start with the placemaking projects. So wayfinding, lighting, public restrooms, and the placemaking plan. Does anybody have any questions, or does anybody who is involved in the committee work for this want to add anything that we missed on these projects?
I have a quick question, Dylan, on the sequencing, which is, in your experience, is there a best practice in terms of having a plan first, in terms of the placemaking plan, and then following up on things like lighting or wayfinding? Is there a typical sequence?
Well, so I think that's one of the key questions for the towns. And it's actually a key question for all of these recommendations, right? And I think we can get into that later, but which one is the most important one to do first so that you can queue up the rest. In terms of the public realm projects, I think you can go either way. You can get the quicker win of an implementation project, just with the understanding that it may not be perfectly integrated, or you can do the downtown plan and make sure things are going to be well integrated and possibly set yourself up better for funding in the future. So I think it can go either way.
Yeah.
It just depends on the town's priorities.
Yeah, I agree with Dylan. I mean, actually what we're seeing is there's sort of two different, I wouldn't say opposite approaches, but two different approaches towns are taking. I mean, for the tradition is to, you do a master plan like Oak Bluff did. You spend $100,000 or more, you really look at everything in detail, you talk about everything with everybody, you draw up all the plans, and then you implement them in lockstep. The other approach is the sort of modern movement toward what's called tactical urbanism, which is like, let's not make another plan that nobody's going to look at. Let's just go out and do stuff. And that's really good when you have some energetic local people who just want to get things done and are willing to go out and set up fire pits in the middle of an empty lot and be out there on the weekend serving hot chocolate. So I think that I wouldn't say this, as a consultant, I think you should spend a lot of money doing planning. As a sort of member of a community, I think you need to look at, what are the resources you have in terms of money to invest in plans, and also personal resources, volunteers and so on, who are willing to do these things. And do your volunteers and your staff and the other people who are involved in the downtown, are they folks who want to do a plan first and agree on things? Are there things that are not so certain that you need to hash out before you can implement? Or do you have things that you want to do? You just need somebody to get out there and start doing it. So yeah, there's not a particularly clear one answer to that, but I think part of it is maybe a little bit of an analysis of where you are today with your volunteers and your staff time and everything else, and thinking about the best approach. It might be some combination of things. I think there are, I think maybe a third way, which is towns which embark on a large scale sort of master planning process, but then very quickly do short-term interventions. And maybe that's part of the process. Like, we're not sure what to do with the downtown, but come, let's have a festival and set something up temporarily to test out some ideas.
Yeah, I want to add one thing on the tactical urbanism or demonstration project, which are those
Wait, I can't hear.
short-term installations, which is that I've been increasingly seeing in communities that do some of these short-term installations that they're quickly taken down when there's an explosion of opposition to the project. So if you don't do your community outreach and your planning beforehand to make sure that people know what the intervention is, you're really sure it's actually implementing the town's goals and the priority of your residents, those projects can backfire. I don't think that's as true for sort of the like winter event placemaking thing, where you're not changing a street in a significant way. But some of the street projects have, I think, backfired. So there's kind of no way around doing the community outreach and the engagement and the really strong grounding in the town's goals and priorities and the communication of that. I see a couple hands up, so let's hear from Sandy and then Kathy.
Great. Thanks. This is Sandy. Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Very informative, and I love the case study use. One section that I thought was a little bit light, and I may have missed some of it, I guess, but one of the issues in Manchester that we're dealing with is determining how to make public restrooms easily found, or where to place it. And it looks like, we need to protect areas like Reed Park. And I love the idea of adding like these other little pocket spaces that are more inviting, rather than building something out and wasting that space. And also knowing that while it's nice to be convenient with the public restrooms, people don't want to hang out near them. So do you have any further insights to share regarding what you found out about Manchester and Essex regarding this aspect?
Yeah, so I think that we haven't done the work to figure out where the best location for a public restroom is. And I'm sorry we weren't able to do that with this project. There are two aspects. I think what you said is totally right on, that one of the key things with the public restroom is knowing where it is. So for a local, you may know that there's a restroom that's open and available in the basement of the town hall. But if you're a visitor, you probably don't know that. So knowing where it is, having hours for that public restroom that make it available for the public when they're there is really important. And then citing it, it's going to be a matter of what's the most central location that's available that's not better put towards some other use. So that's about all I can offer on that one.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of went quickly past that example of the Portland Loo that they put into Shelter Island, but I think, I mean, they're, with the influx of summer visitors, they bring in spotted pots for the beaches and I think for some of the parks. But obviously you don't want to have, a row of spotted pots in your downtown. It's just, and people don't really like them very much. And the whole idea with the Portland Loo, which was designed for Portland, Oregon, and is constructed out there, is to design something which actually enhances the streetscape, which functions as a spotted pot in that it doesn't have any plumbing other than a tank underneath. But what they did is they designed it to look and feel and work like a regular bathroom. You can flush the toilet, etc. And you have no idea it's not a regular, just a public restroom. And you can move it around and test different locations as you can with a spotted pot. So it's right on the street on the edge of a park. So everyone knows it's there. You see it as you're passing by. It's easy to find. Also very safe. You don't feel like you're going off in a corner and not certain what's going on. So I guess the advantage of that is a lot cheaper, probably half the price of building a building for restrooms, but it's still rather very expensive at over $100,000 compared to spotted pots. But I think it's a sort of an interesting compromise.
Yeah. And what do you think about putting it in a critical location that you want to drive people to use to picnic and things like that? Recommending it be sort of, in another area, maybe closer to where parking is or something like that.
I think,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I don't think we've looked at the situation enough to make that judgment call. I think you need to do some design work to figure out the answer to that question.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Kathy?
Hi, thank you very much. First of all, I just want to say your presentation was outstanding. I just think it was very comprehensive, covered all the bases, and gave us lots to think about. So thank you very much. I live on Lower Pine Street, and I walk downtown 3 or 4 times each day because I walk my dog down there. And a couple of things caught my attention, which I'd ask for you guys to consider. First is and I forget what part of the presentation it was on, but there were some additional bump outs and landscaping across the street from the town hall at the corner of, I think, Central and Elm Street.
Yep.
Great. Please. Top priority for me is safe walkability downtown. And that particular intersection that you mentioned, I walk literally 3 or 4 times a day. And it's pretty dangerous to cross that particular crosswalk in front of Town Hall because there's so many interactions, like 3 or 4 different streets there. And someone asked about priorities early on. In the master plan here, I would ask you to consider safety and street crossing to be near the top. So that was comment number 1. Comment number 2 is I had the opportunity recently to use the commuter rail to go into Boston. Hadn't done that in a very long time. It's a hidden gem in our community, and even the downtown stations in Boston that I hadn't been to in decades, they are so much cleaner and nicer than they used to be. And I just didn't hear the concept of public transportation mentioned as something to either consider as part of the advertising, the waypoints. You know, it's a hidden gem, our commuter rail, and I would ask you to consider that. And my last comment is someone asked about immediate action versus a big plan. It doesn't have to be a choice. A good strategy can be developed quickly, but you want to implement frequent improvements. But it should be aligned with a strategy, because strategy without action is really not helpful, and action without strategy is chaos. So I don't think it has to be an either or. I think it's a good integrated strategic plan with many quick improvements is often very helpful. So thank you again. Great presentation.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just respond to the commuter rail. That we definitely have considered the commuter rail. It's a key asset for Manchester by the Sea. I've heard a number of times that the people in Essex are jealous of Manchester by Sea because of the commuter rail. And one of the reasons it's a key asset is because it draws a lot of visitors in the summer who arrive by commuter rail and go to Singing Beach and then patronize your businesses. So that's important. And for them, wayfinding is really important because they arrive at one end of downtown and their destination is away from downtown, right? So you need a way to communicate to them that, hey, there's something on the other side of the commuter rails on Beach Street. And yes, it does continue around the corner and stretch all the way past the town hall. Okay, any other comments on those public realm projects? So that was outdoor lighting, wayfinding, restrooms, and then the overall placemaking plan. Comments, questions, thoughts, concerns?
I don't see any hands.
All right. Let's move on. I'm going to share my screen again so we can all be reminded of the other projects. Okay. How about the branding and marketing, off-season events, cultivating desirable businesses, shared economic development project manager, or zoning changes? Do you like any of those ideas? How could they be improved? Greg? You don't, hold on for just 1 second. By the way, feel free to just jump in. You don't need to raise your hand. This is a pretty small group, and I think we can just have a conversation.
Sure. So on the shared economic development director, I just wondered if there was conversations with the Cape Ann Chamber to see if they could fulfill that role rather than us hiring someone new. Is it something that we might be able to partner with them on? Again, finding a funding source, I understand that's critical. But I didn't know if there were conversations with the chamber on that concept.
I don't remember whether, yeah, Olivia from the chamber is here tonight. And that's definitely a possibility. I don't think we specifically talked about whether the chamber could take that on. But it's close to Olivia's role from what I understand. Olivia, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, so I think it's something that we can definitely talk about and maybe get together to discuss it. Part of my position is it's to cover all 5 of the communities we represent. So my only hesitation is taking on so much where I'm not able to put into all of the other communities we represent. But I do think we should explore it or talk about it. There is an opportunity with the city of Gloucester, for example, of kind of the same thing that was brought up now. So I definitely think we can explore it. It's definitely worth a conversation.
Yeah,
with Ken, the CEO.
In a lot of ways, the chamber would be a really great organization for that position to be seated in, because otherwise they would be seated either in one of the 2 towns, right? Which would automatically create a sense of ownership or friction, could potentially create some friction. So having an outside organization take that role would be great.
Dylan, I have another sort of best practices oriented question.
Yes.
In your experience working with other municipalities and other sort of economic development initiatives, do you ever get towns that double up or merge 2 of the functions you described? Number 1, the marketing, and number 2, the economic development, and sort of, which is fundamentally a little bit of a marketing job.
I have not.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind to me, Dylan, is towns that have a business improvement district,
right,
with a staff person. Frequently, that person will combine a marketing program, working with businesses directly and the town, and sort of marketing collectively everything that's going on, as well as doing the sort of general economic development and downtown improvement stuff.
I do think that there were a number of skills or things that we were looking for an economic development person to do that isn't quite in the wheelhouse of the chamber as well. So I think I think there's a component that's definitely about marketing and events, et cetera, but I think there's some very structural and different type of economic development that we wanted to focus on as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the towns that are successful, like some of those case studies, it's somebody in the downtown every day, just working on stuff on a very granular level that makes this work. I don't think it needs to be a particularly high paid person, but it needs to be somebody with a lot of energy and ideas.
Just really quick, I can say that today I was in Essex, just walking into businesses. So that is something that I am doing as part of this position. So if there's any way to do more of that or have a specific focus, that's something that the chamber can do.
Yeah, I think that the key step with that project recommendation, the key first step for implementing it is to really focus in on specifically what each town wants and where there's overlap, and see if you can come up with a position that is possible to do within a reasonable amount of time.
You mentioned the business improvement district. You didn't mention that as a potential funding source for some of these issues, and even hiring someone. Did you purposely shy away from that, or?
We floated district management in a bid in the initial meetings, and it didn't get an enthusiastic response.
Yeah, okay.
So, yes, it's a great idea if there's local buy-in, and it depends on the property owners buying in. You have a kind of in a unique situation in Manchester by the Sea where you have a small number of property owners who own a lot of the downtown storefronts. And so on the one hand, that might mean that there's greater opportunity to form a bid. On the other hand, maybe you don't need one because it's just a couple people who need to coordinate with each other.
Dylan,
Yes.
you mentioned working on getting your development coordinator soon. When you say that, what's your idea of soon? Or
Soon.
quickly?
Quickly. So
Yes.
the first step there is to figure out, so like I said, figure out what the needs are, what the job responsibilities are, what the job description is. Then you got to get the funding. Funding is probably not soon. Funding is probably, depends on how you fund it. If you can justify funding it through ARPA, I'm not even going to try. ARPA is basically local fiscal recovery funds. If you can justify that, you could be funding that very soon. It's a little bit of a stretch, probably. I think you'd have to say that town staff are overburdened or were overburdened with the response to COVID. And therefore you need additional staff to take this on. And that it meets other goals like, making better neighborhoods for public health through the kinds of things we've been talking about. Anyway, so maybe ARPA funding. Otherwise, you're probably talking about like 6 months to a year to align the grant funding. And then, hiring somebody, maybe it's 3 to 6 months.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to riff a little bit on this ARPA funding thing. So there's a lot of money out there right now through the American Reinvestment blah 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 Act. It's a really unique opportunity. So, but a lot of that funding requires regional collaboration.
I was just going to ask that, Dylan, actually, because I know that came up in a lot of our sessions. And I'm wondering if that's a good lens to look at some of these wide choices, because I know you want us to edit. Are there certain funding sources that you've tied to some of these ideas, some of these potential projects that either because of their timing or because of their nature are really reward coordination and increase the chances if Manchester and Essex actually, partner up to go for some of these grants?
So one of the sort of collaboration opportunities are the tourism grants. And so anything that's tourism related, which is a lot of this is, but specifically wayfinding, possibly outdoor lighting, events, the sort of winter events. So any of those make sense to definitely communicate between the towns and potentially push them out to see whether there's interest across Cape Ann as a whole. Have any of you seen similar projects in other places, and were there any things that you saw in those other places that you think you want to emulate or you want to avoid?
Well, before I came to Cape Ann, I was out in the Berkshires in Lennox, and no one knew the individual names of the towns. It was just the Berkshires, and so that was effective. That was an effective marketing effort is to, you market the Berkshires, you don't need to market the individual towns. When people came to the Berkshires, they visited all the different towns. And I think that's similar for Cape Ann. We don't need to market individual towns so much as we market the region. And I think that can be very effective. And it certainly was, and continues to be out in the western part of the state.
Yeah.
Same with Cape Cod. You don't really identify with individual towns on Cape Cod. It's Cape Cod. So again, I think that is instructive for us here.
Yep. Yeah, and then really developing the niche that each one of those communities fills, so that people know that they're going to go to Manchester for X, Y, and Z, and they're going to go to Essex for
Right.
A, B, and C.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So going back to the question we had at the beginning of, well, actually before that, are there any of these ideas that you think would be particularly impactful for addressing the hit that businesses have taken from COVID?
I like when you hit upon more of the wayfinding in terms of people who come in on the commuter rail and saying, yes, you can go to the beach, but there's so much more up around the corner as well. And the before and afters that you all did, the pictures and then the mock-ups of the consistent color, consistent designs, the plantings, and we're already doing, we have a great group that's got the benches going, our longevity benches in town. But it just made such a difference, the small enhancements to make it cohesive. I thought that had a huge impact, or could.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
I think the economic development director is a really important one. I think and I think for Essex as well as Manchester, and I think the opportunity as well there is that there are a lot of complementary net needs between Manchester and Essex, and that would be one area where the differences would actually complement and is actually a strength, so that there's not a competitive thing per se, but because Essex and Manchester are very, very different. But I think that could really impact the businesses and of course the marketing as well. I think that would have a big impact on businesses. I hear that all the time.
Okay. Thanks.
I would just add, and I was involved in the process building up to this as well, but I think that keeping that in mind, the recovery for businesses from COVID really kind of gives weight to the idea of doing a long-term simultaneously with a short-term approach, doing the winter placemaking or something like that while you're start embarking on a longer-term solid foundation plan, because businesses need help now, right? That's why we're doing this now. So if there's things that we can start doing now that are non-permanent or flexible or can grow in the future, like these events, that would be really important, I would think, while you're also building this strong platform for economic development and strategic planning in downtown.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Dana, and the non-permanent portion and the testing out. And we know firsthand that testing things out and giving people an opportunity to understand how they work or how they might work and how they don't work is very important while you're creating that plan, because I do think an overall plan is good. I also think that Becky hit on it when she said that, the incremental, the small incremental changes can make a big difference. And it doesn't have to be in your face design, which I think there could be some pushback in Manchester, but it needs to be subtle and in keeping with what we know, what we love. So I think those are great ideas. And I do think that although we didn't touch on arts and culture, that is one of the touchstones for for the placemaking and for the wayfinding, and frankly, for the winter events. So I love the idea of some things that are long-term, including an economic development position and a plan, but the short term for the winter events and things like that. I think if we can marry those ideas, then we're coming out with something now and get a good framework for the future.
Yeah, I like the idea of coordinating across with Essex, maybe even, I know Magnolia doesn't have a lot going on right now, but, just coordinating so that the events complement each other versus compete with dates. The one thing I thought was interesting is Ipswich used to have, like, sort of around Halloween, they had their river festival, but they made it a whole season of illumination. So they're drawing people to Ipswich every week to different parts of the downtown area. And so it's not just a one-time event, but it's a whole season. So, if you're busy, you find another day when you can go. And so it's just sort of top of mind to say, oh, let's look at the calendar, see if I can make it this time. And so coordinating across Manchester and Essex with something like that might be very cool.
Sandy, I'd also add that one of the strengths of that sort of event is that there's things for all, you have time and space when you kind of stretch it across for all different niches. You have the family friendly events on like Saturday mornings, and then you have the like beer garden adult events on like Thursday night. You can really kind of appeal to different categories of people. It's not kind of a 3-hour event once that's going to kind of fit one group.
Right, exactly.
The other advantage, of course, is that you could build momentum in terms of equity of people under expecting things. It takes people time to train them to expect something. And, sometimes you have to stick with something in order to land the message eventually.
Yeah, and I think that that picking up on what Dana was saying, and also the giving people time to understand what's going on. So with the winter events, having it on successive weekends and incorporating some sort of installation where you have seating and warming areas, those installations can stay up between the events, right? So they're there if somebody wants to come downtown on a Thursday afternoon or a Wednesday morning, and they're also there for the Saturday event.
So I wonder in your I think $50,000, or anyway, in your budget, I'm aware that there is a huge amount of time that's put into those events. And I don't know if the $50,000 assumes that we have the capacity to do that, or is there someone out there that helps implement these things and does the legwork, and can that be part of the budget? Because I just know that's a big tripping hazard there if you don't have the capacity. It's a fabulous idea. I love it. I would love to know if there's that we can work into the budget, finding someone who actually does that kind of thing.
Yeah, so Jonathan, who is the consultant, our expert on that topic, has done the organization he works for got a grant from the Bar Foundation and did a lot of those installations last winter. And I think they were mostly in like the $20,000 to $30,000 range, including the consultation. So someone like him can do the consultation. I don't know that he's actually on the ground, like setting things up, moving things around, reaching out to the business owners, which is all that really time-consuming legwork that
Restocking the stove.
Yeah. That's going to be your fire department who does that part. But
yeah, it'd be interesting to know what we might get for that money, and how much capacity we need to build on the ground for it to be successful.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got some great volunteers, but yeah.
Okay.
Dylan, I might mention something. In the center of downtown, Manchester has two very strong resources that it might draw on for a number of these events. One is the library, and the other one is the museum.
Right.
And I don't know if you visited either of those, but both of them have children's programs that run right through the winter and could be expanded in some way to encompass a broader geography. And on top of that, the museum has an art show in the
Great.
middle of winter that could be used as leverage to broaden to the greater community. So both of those are concepts that are kind of running, but they're in a much smaller footprint right now.
One thing that I've learned is that in every meeting I have with people from these two communities, I'm going to learn something new, great that's already happening. You know, you guys you're really doing wonderful things. So I hope you are proud of what you're doing. And it's just, you know, opportunities to do more.
Hi, everyone. I bet you didn't think you were going to hear my voice tonight. Just got in, so I missed the presentation, which I am hearing was wonderful, and I'm so happy. But as far as the ARPA goes, I kind of want to go back to funding. I love all the ideas that have been recently thrown out and where this is taking us. But it is going to be funding that is going to make any and or all of these ideas possible. And ARPA funding, in order to get it, here's the deal. It has to have some tie back to COVID. You have, in order to get these funds, you need to show the reason why, and you have to be able to tie it to an implication that came down from COVID, which I think we very easily can do because the towns were very much impacted in alike ways and in different ways. I also think that one of the things that you're going to be able to do when you were talking about getting a person for business to act on behalf of both towns, that is something that ARPA did talk about when we were in funding meetings, and they will either pay to add on to hours for current town employees or make funding available for new people to come forward if it is tied to these programs. And the more, it gives us more leverage if we are working as a group. They want to see communities tied together because the ultimate reasoning is that they want to see that towns keep each other afloat. They like the idea of towns becoming neighborhoods. Again, maybe that feeds back to the idea of the Berkshires or Cape Cod, how you think of them, but they are asking for that kind of partnership. And I think that we have that in the projects that we're looking at and for other projects that could happen.
Donna, I'm glad that you got clarity from all those ARPA, those funding meetings that we've been trying to get to. I think you must have gotten one that I didn't, because that sounded like you have pretty good clarity. So thank you for that.
No, you know what happened? That's all I've got. That was my takeaway. All I want to know is where the money is going to come from for these fantastic ideas. And that's why I pulled that out of there.
Yeah, I've spent more hours than I'd like trying to read the guidance from the federal government on, particularly on the local funding. And my read on it is that they actually want to fund these kinds of projects. They provide examples of similar things, but they require you to justify it.
Absolutely. And because they're coming down in the way of federal dollars, it is going to require a lot of bookkeeping, so to speak, note taking, filing, reporting. And that again will help when we say that we want to look for somebody for a position. between the two communities, because that's what it's going to take. The chamber, absolutely. They're great. Thank you, Olivia. And Ken does a lot in the way of what they can bring to us, but they're not going to be able to if we do get funding through ARPA or in other places. They're not going to be able to give you a personnel to follow through with what is going to be required probably to meet the standard. So I think that's even more important that we're looking for somebody for that position, even though we know it's not a forever position. It would get us through, and they're talking funding through this ARPA program for up to 2027. So I mean, there is some possibility and some vision of length here.
Great. Any final comments?
I guess I just have one. So for this position, I guess if there's elements of this position that the chamber could do, I think it would be worth it to discuss that and bring it to Ken, whether it's in just, a bulleted list of, things that the chamber has the bandwidth to do. And maybe that leaves more room for this part-time economic development position. But I just wanted to put that out there. Maybe it's a possibility.
Great. Anybody else? All right, should we do our poll? So I'm going to launch a poll. It has 4 questions. You click on the little buttons you see, and you need to scroll down to get to all the questions before you can submit it. So obviously we're asking where you live, basically which community are you answering for, whether it's living there or working there, or just loving it more. But we're asking you to pick one. And then which recommendations do you just generally support? Like, you think it's a good idea that the town does this thing? Which one is your top choice? Pick one. And then do you support the communities continuing to work together?
It was really hard, Dylan.
Stressing your brain out at close to 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night. And people are still responding.
Well, this is West Burnham.
Yes.
I know I haven't been a real active participant with you guys, but I do have one quick question that I don't think you're going to be able to answer now, but maybe you can feed back through Dana,
Yes.
because I'm also on the planning board and the strategic planning committee.
Okay.
The pop-up business
Yes.
concept. We had a rather unfortunate experience a month or so ago in Essex. And I'm curious what sort of regulation or permitting process other towns might use to try to keep that under control some way. Because we wound up with a huge traffic problem. Bunch of cops on overtime for the entire weekend. It wasn't pretty. And I'd like to at least be able to take a look at that as part of our zoning review. And that's because most of it would occur in the business district that we just created. So that may need some adjustment if we're gonna try to promote that.
Does that mean that it was an exceptionally successful pop-up business?
There were 0 permits.
Oh,
The Board of Health wound up getting involved. They socked up the entire center of town with traffic parking on both sides of the road. We had traffic jams halfway out to Ipswich. I would not consider that successful, at least
Sounds
from
like
the
it
town's perspective.
maybe a desirable idea or desirable product and maybe poor planning.
Well, there was no notification whatsoever.
Got it.
It showed up Saturday morning, locking the town up. And it was like, oh my God, they were calling back every cop they could get a hold of.
Well, I think
Sorry.
thanks, Wes. I'm still getting on board with what's been happening in Essex, so I would welcome any other information you have to share about that. Somebody may have mentioned something briefly about that in a previous discussion we had about this. But yeah, I'd love more information on it. I think that would be the benefit of having kind of a town pop-up space or event, that we could establish some regulations and expectations, and there would be a place and to do it and a process to go through. I think it's a great sign that there's a demand for that sort of thing and people who want to go to it. So there's vendors who want to sell stuff and people who want to buy it. So I think that this is the right direction to take it in, is kind of legalizing it.
Oh,
You know?
I'm very much in favor. I was just haven't had the opportunity to try to figure out what other cities and towns and how they're dealing with it.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
mean,
I
a
think-
common space that we could set aside as a town is one aspect, but that's going to have to be permitted and regulated in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I think
So
there are
but
plenty
this
of
doesn't have to be answered right now. So
yeah.
I'm more looking for down the road a little bit.
Great. Yeah, I think there are plenty of examples out there that we could look to and get more information for ideas on how to do it sustainably and safely.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to share the poll results. Can you all see those on your screen? Yeah. Looks like 9 of you are from Manchester by the Sea. Sorry for the misspelling. 4 of you from Essex and 1 from another community. The support for the projects, looks like most of them there's at least 50% support. I'll call out the ones where there isn't, it doesn't reach that threshold. So that's public bathrooms, cultivating businesses, and the pop-up spaces. The ones that seem to have the most support are wayfinding, off-season events and placemaking, and the short-term economic development project manager. And then the top choice, yeah, it's pretty spread there. 3 for the economic development project manager, 3 for lighting, 2 for wayfinding, 2 for pop-up space. And then 86% of the 14 people support continuing collaboration. So that's good.
That's good. I wonder if it would be different if we had the 2 top choices, because it was very difficult. It was very difficult for me. So I want to adjust the rules.
Yeah.
I do think that there are many that I would be highly supportive of. So thank you for this. Thank you for trying to get consensus.
Yeah, I mean it's a straw poll of 14 people who showed up in a room at one time, so it's one very minor data point.
We appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you for spending your Wednesday evening with us. Any closing comments from Sue or Dana or anybody else?
I would just say thank you to everyone, and for folks that are on the line and didn't know, I just wanted to add that there was also a component of this project where Dylan went out and spoke specifically to a variety of businesses. So there was that interchange as well, but and there have been businesses that have been part of the discussion going on. So I just want to thank everyone for hanging in there, and particularly our steering committee members who really spent a good amount of time thinking about these things. And Dylan, Peter, and your staff, thank you for pulling this all together. I'm looking forward to the outcome.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Dana
Yeah,
just shared her email with whoever wants
Yeah, if everybody, because I'm kind of new and I don't even know if my email is on the town website. So if you want to reach me with any other comments or thoughts, or share it with somebody who didn't make it to the meeting tonight that has other comments and thoughts, send me whatever you got and I can forward it on to Dodson and Flinker, Dylan, for integrating into the kind of recommendations and the next steps. And yeah, thanks everybody. Thanks for your hard work, Dylan, on this, and thanks everybody for coming and participating.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
it. All right,
Thank you.
Dylan, I have a quick question.
sure.
Will all the slides be available?
Yep.
Super.
Yeah, I'll send them to Dana and Sue and the recording as well.
Excellent.
we'll-
Thank you so much.
We'll get
Bye,
that up
guys.
on the town webpage.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Good
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.